this episode, we're going to pause the forward motion on purpose and do something that strong analysts learn to value early, which is to stop and make sure the base you are standing on is actually solid. When people rush through the early concepts in threat intelligence, they often carry small misunderstandings that feel harmless at first, but later those misunderstandings turn into big mistakes in collection, analysis, and communication. A review checkpoint is not a quiz or a scolding, and it is not about memorizing vocabulary for its own sake. It is about confirming that your mental model is correct, so the next set of skills has a stable place to land. By the end of this checkpoint, you should feel like the fundamentals are not just familiar words, but dependable tools you can reach for without getting tangled or second-guessing yourself. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first foundation to lock in is the purpose of threat intelligence itself, because everything else depends on having the right reason for doing the work. Threat intelligence, TI, is not a collection of cool facts about attackers, and it is not a pile of indicators that you forward around to look busy. TI is decision support, which means it exists to reduce uncertainty for someone who has to choose an action, set a priority, or allocate resources. If your work does not connect to a decision, it may still be interesting, but it is not functioning as intelligence. This framing helps you avoid a common beginner trap, where you focus on what is easy to collect rather than what is meaningful to answer. Once you truly accept that the output is meant to change a decision or clarify a risk, you start to naturally ask better questions about what to collect and how to communicate it. Another foundation is understanding the levels of intelligence and why those levels exist, because it prevents mismatched expectations. Strategic intelligence is meant for big-picture decisions like risk posture, investment, and long-range planning, and it is often written for leaders who need to understand trends and impact. Operational intelligence supports planning and coordination for specific threats or campaigns, often helping teams understand what an adversary is doing and what might come next. Tactical intelligence is the most immediate and technical, helping defenders recognize activity and respond quickly in systems and networks. Beginners sometimes treat these as separate worlds, but they are connected, and good work can move between them when you keep the intent clear. The key is that each level has a different audience, a different time horizon, and a different tolerance for detail, so the same fact can be useful in different ways depending on how you frame it. You also want the intelligence cycle to feel natural rather than like a diagram you once saw and forgot, because it describes how good work stays organized. The cycle begins with direction, which means defining what you are trying to answer and why it matters. It moves into collection, where you gather information that might help answer the requirement, and then processing, where you clean it up and make it usable. Analysis is where you interpret the information, test ideas, and decide what it means, and dissemination is where you package the result so the right person can act on it. Feedback closes the loop by confirming whether the output helped and what needs to change next time. A checkpoint mindset asks you to imagine any piece of TI work you have seen and located on this cycle, because that practice reveals where teams often skip steps and why they get inconsistent outcomes. Requirements are another core piece to lock down, because they are the bridge between a vague concern and a focused workflow. A requirement is a question or statement of need that is specific enough to guide collection and specific enough to judge success afterward. Beginners sometimes write requirements that are really topics, like malware or phishing, which are too broad to drive disciplined work. A good requirement has a sense of who needs the answer, what decision it will support, and what time frame matters, even if it is described in plain language. When requirements are clear, collection becomes purposeful and analysis becomes accountable, because you can always ask whether your work is moving toward the answer. When requirements are fuzzy, the workflow becomes a treadmill, and you can be very busy without becoming more effective. Now let's make sure the collection foundation is locked, because many later skills assume you can gather information without drowning in it. Collection is the act of bringing in raw material that might help answer the requirement, and the workflow needs to be repeatable so you do not reinvent it every time. A strong foundation includes knowing your routine sources versus your on-demand sources, so you are not constantly interrupting yourself to chase the latest thing. It also includes capturing context with every collected item, because an artifact without provenance becomes a rumor in your own notes. You should be able to explain where something came from, why you collected it, and how it relates to a requirement without having to rely on memory. When that habit is in place, your collection pipeline can scale because it is not dependent on you personally remembering every detail. Processing and normalization are easy to underestimate, so this checkpoint should make them feel like practical skills rather than background noise. Processing is where information becomes comparable and searchable, which is essential when volume increases. Even without heavy tooling, you can practice normalization by being consistent about naming, timestamps, labels, and basic categories. If you describe the same concept in different ways across your notes, you create hidden fragmentation that prevents you from seeing patterns. Consistency also helps when multiple people contribute, because shared labels create shared understanding. A strong foundation means you can look at your own collected items and quickly filter them by relevance, source type, and time window, because the information is structured in a predictable way. Another foundation that needs to be locked is the difference between data, information, and intelligence, because that difference shapes how you treat evidence. Data is raw observation, like a log entry or a recorded event, and it can be true without being meaningful. Information is data given context, like understanding that a connection happened at a certain time from a certain system under a certain condition. Intelligence is information interpreted to support a decision, which means it includes reasoning, relevance, and an understanding of implications. Beginners sometimes treat any collected information as intelligence, which leads to overconfidence and noisy reporting. When you keep the categories distinct, you become more honest about what you know and what you suspect. That honesty is not weakness. It is what allows stakeholders to trust you, because your conclusions do not pretend to be more certain than the evidence allows. At this checkpoint, you should also feel comfortable with the idea of signal versus noise, because it is one of the most important instincts in the field. The world will always produce more potential indicators, reports, and alerts than you can process. Signal is the subset of that material that connects to your requirement and meaningfully changes what you think or what you recommend. Noise is not necessarily false, but it is irrelevant, redundant, or too weak to justify attention right now. The mistake is to assume that more collection automatically means better intelligence, when in reality more collection can hide the useful parts if you do not tree off. A locked foundation means you can confidently set aside low-value items without feeling like you are failing, because you understand that focus is part of quality. We should also check your understanding of the relationship between internal telemetry and external reporting, because beginners often give one of them automatic priority without thinking. Internal telemetry tells you what is happening in your environment, and it is grounded in observation, but it can be incomplete or lack context about broader trends. External reporting can provide context, patterns, and adversary behavior across many victims, but it varies widely in quality and may not apply to your situation. A strong foundation is being able to hold both at the same time, treating internal evidence as the anchor and external reporting as a lens. When those two align, confidence grows, and when they conflict, you have a clear reason to investigate further. The workflow mindset is to keep the provenance of each piece of information intact, so you do not blend claims and observations into one misleading narrative. Communication is another foundational area that must be locked, even before we get into more advanced analysis skills, because intelligence that cannot be used might as well not exist. Good communication in TI is not about fancy language. It is about clarity, relevance, and making it easy for the audience to act. That means choosing the right level of detail for the audience and being explicit about what you know, what you infer, and what you recommend. Beginners often either dump everything they found or oversimplify into a vague summary, and both approaches fail in different ways. A locked foundation is being able to tell a simple story that ties evidence to conclusion and conclusion to decision, without pretending that uncertainty does not exist. When you can do that, your work becomes trustworthy, and trust is the currency that makes intelligence influential. This checkpoint should also include an honest look at common misconceptions that can quietly derail you later if you do not correct them now. One misconception is that intelligence is mainly about finding the one correct answer, when in reality it is often about narrowing uncertainty and presenting the most defensible explanation among several possibilities. Another misconception is that indicators are the main product, when in reality they are often just raw inputs or supporting details rather than the core story. A third misconception is that good analysts have perfect intuition, when in reality good analysts have good habits that protect them from being fooled by the first explanation that feels right. If you internalize these corrections early, you will move through later topics with less frustration and fewer false starts. This is what it means to have foundations locked and loaded, because your mindset is aligned with how the work truly functions. You should also be able to describe what success looks like for a piece of intelligence work, because that is part of being disciplined. Success is not that you collected a lot, or that you wrote a long report, or that you sounded confident. Success is that a decision became easier, a risk became clearer, a response became faster, or a priority became more defensible because of what you produced. That means you need feedback loops, even informal ones, where you learn whether your output was used and what could have made it more useful. Beginners sometimes avoid feedback because it feels like judgment, but it is actually how you refine your process. A strong foundation treats feedback as part of the cycle, not as an optional extra. When feedback is normal, improvement becomes routine rather than emotional. As you leave this checkpoint, the most important takeaway is that the fundamentals are not separate from the advanced skills. They are the structure that makes advanced skills work. If your requirements are clear, your collection is disciplined, your context is preserved, and your thinking stays anchored in decision support, then later analytic techniques will sharpen something that is already stable. If those foundations are shaky, advanced techniques become a way to confidently produce the wrong answer faster. Locked and loaded means you are not just aware of the terms, but you can explain the relationships between them and apply them consistently under pressure. That is the point of pausing here, because the course moves into more judgment-heavy topics next, and those topics will reward you for having a reliable mental model. With that base in place, you can push forward knowing you are building on something that will hold.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.